Hey guys, tonight we step back into a time when villages smelled like smoke, sour beer, and whatever was left in the pig troughs by mid-morning. It's damp, always damp. And the road under your feet? Let's just say shoes were optional, and mud was guaranteed. You're walking into the square now, not as a trader, not as a pilgrim, but as someone who's been caught doing something, well, frowned upon. There's a wooden structure ahead. It looks like someone nailed together a fence and a bad idea. This, dear listener, is the pillory. You won't survive long in this world if you're prone to flirting. Because here, adultery is more than a scandal. It's a village-wide event with full participation, some singing, and possibly a cabbage to the face. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere unexpected, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing who else is wide awake right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the square, where time moves slowly, but judgment comes fast. The villagers are already there, gathered like crows on a fence, craning their necks with that particular look that only comes with witnessing someone else's downfall. You try not to trip on the cobbles. They're more jagged than they need to be, and your tunic is sticking in all the wrong places. The air smells like wet wool, horse, and justice. The pillory creaks as the steward fiddles with the locking mechanism. It's oddly theatrical. There's no rush here. A public shaming deserves a proper introduction. One woman coughs dramatically into her kerchief. Two boys toss pebbles at a chicken, pretending not to stare. You're about to be put on display, head and hands secured in weathered oak, in a village that doesn't even have a bakery that opens on Mondays. It doesn't matter whether the affair was real, exaggerated, or entirely invented. What matters is that someone saw something, or said they did, and the rumor balloon inflated faster than a goose on market day. Mainstream historians agree that these punishments weren't just legal, they were theatrical. The pillory, stocks, and even ducking stools weren't really about pain. They were about visibility, about making you into a lesson with legs. The community needed to see your shame so they could feel cleaner by comparison. It's a kind of spiritual laundry day, with you as the dirty tunic. You hear the clop of hooves nearby. Someone brought their horse, probably just to lean against it smugly. No one's actually talking to you, but they're definitely talking about you. That's worse. The words flow like cider on feast day. Caught red-handed. His own cousin's wife. Behind the granary, of all places. Now, here's a fringe detail you wouldn't expect. Pillories were sometimes intentionally built to be slightly too low, so the person locked inside had to stoop or hunch in a rather undignified way. It wasn't enough to restrain you. You had to look silly. Humiliation was the point, after all. A bent back and a pigeon on your head? That's medieval justice. The steward calls your name, loudly, so even the deaf widow at the edge of the crowd perks up. He reads your crimes. The words are familiar, rehearsed, but somehow they sound even worse aloud. Fornication, adultery, disruption of village peace. That last one's always thrown in for good measure. As if your rendezvous caused a crop failure. You're shoved into place. The wood is rough and splintery. Your chin rests awkwardly on the lower brace as the top slams down. Locked in. You're part of the scenery now, like the moss on the north-facing stones. Someone behind you mutters something about divine punishment. A child laughs. Another throws a crust of bread. Here's where historians start debating. Some argue that these punishments were genuinely corrective, meant to inspire repentance and reintegration. Others think they were more about reinforcing social hierarchies and controlling behavior through collective shaming. After all, if everyone's watching you fall, they're not questioning the people doing the pushing. A bee lands near your eye. You try not to flinch. Dignity is hard to come by, but it's not impossible. If you keep your face still, if you breathe through your nose and ignore the smell of someone's turnip stew cooking nearby, you might just make it through this with the slimmest shred of pride. Someone walks up with a paintbrush. You don't want to know what they're painting on your forehead, but judging by the giggles, it's not a flattering portrait. Probably a crude heart, or worse, a broken one. Red ochre mixed with spit. A common village blend. Your feet ache. Time crawls. You imagine the sky changing colors just to amuse itself while you stand still. You notice how many people wear shoes with mismatched buckles. You count them again and again just to keep your mind busy. 1, 2. That man's not even wearing shoes, just sacks tied with twine. In the distance, a dog barks. A cow moos. Both somehow sound judgmental. Eventually, the crowd thins. Dinner calls. Someone throws one last turnip, misses, and you hear it plop into a puddle. The steward returns, just as nonchalant, and unlocks you with the same theatrical air he used locking you in. You're free. Kind of. As you step away, arms stiff and cheeks burning, you wonder what happens next. Will people speak to you tomorrow? Will the baker still sell you rye? Is there redemption in a village where everyone knows everyone's chimney smoke patterns? You pass the stone well and glance at your reflection in the water. It's a bit wobbly, but so are you. Behind you, the pillory creaks again as it resets, ready for the next poor soul who kisses someone they shouldn't. You're not even home yet, and the gossip has already outrun you. That's the thing about medieval villages. They're not built for privacy. You can try to walk the back path past the old hedgerow, avoid the market square, and even duck behind the alewife's cottage, but someone's always watching. And if they're not watching, they're imagining. And honestly, imagination tends to be a lot worse. By the time you reach your own gate, 3 neighbors have already whispered, 2 have offered you a knowing look, and 1 has loudly claimed to have seen the whole affair happen, despite the fact that she's blind in one eye and almost never leaves her garden bench. The village gossip mill is louder than any bell, faster than any courier, and fueled by sheer pettiness. You thought the punishment was over, but in truth, it's only just begun. Because now comes the social punishment, which is stickier, itchier, and far more lingering than being locked in wood. You hear the clack of looms from inside a nearby home, and a hissed phrase carried on the breeze. And after all that embroidery, she made for him too. You don't need names. You know exactly who they mean. Because here, everyone knows everyone's hemstitching, hearth smoke pattern, and number of piglets. There are no secrets, only confirmations. Now, here's the mainstream historical fact of the moment. Villages in the medieval period were structured around intense communal surveillance. People lived close together, and resources were shared or exchanged through bartering and obligation. If you broke social norms, you didn't just risk punishment, you risked exclusion. And exclusion, back then, was a slow road to death by disconnection. You pass the tavern. The door creaks open briefly. Inside, someone's laughing too loudly, and you know it's about you. They're probably retelling the whole story, with added flourishes. Maybe you were caught mid-tryst in the priest's barn. Or perhaps there was a goat involved. Or maybe you composed a terribly romantic ballad and sang it while half-dressed. You didn't, of course, but you might as well have. Quirky detail time. Some villages had official gossip collectors, people assigned by the court or parish to investigate and report moral behavior. These weren't always priests or sheriffs. Sometimes they were just particularly nosy townsfolk, blessed with institutional authority and a memory like a steel trap. Think of them as proto-drama influencers. You reach your door and hesitate. Behind it, everything is both familiar and threatening. Does your family know yet? Are they home? Did someone come by to inform them with a generous helping of faux concern and some freshly churned spite? You push it open slowly. Inside, the room is dim, lit only by a sliver of afternoon sun pushing through the shutter gaps. The fire's out. Someone left a bowl of lentils on the table. You're not sure if it's for dinner or just a passive-aggressive gesture. "Don't sit," says a voice from the corner, and you freeze, because of course she knows. Of course. You try to say something, to explain, deny, or at least joke your way through, but the words fall like dropped spoons. The silence is louder than the square was earlier. You can hear your own breathing, and you hate it. Historians still argue whether village communities offered paths to forgiveness after moral lapses like adultery. Some records suggest slow reintegration through public penance and confession. Others argue that once tainted, your reputation was marked indefinitely, especially for women. And while men might recover faster, they'd still carry the stink of suspicion like garlic on their breath. You go to the basin, splash your face. The water is cold and unwelcoming. It doesn't wash anything away. Not the paint on your forehead, not the looks, and definitely not the shame. You pick up a rag, scrub gently, and watch the ochre fade into a rusty pink. But it's still there. In the cracks of your skin, in the twitch of your eye, in the slight curl of your wife's lips. Outside, a rooster crows, oddly late. You glance out the window and see the baker's boy trotting past with a bundle of sticks, probably off to fuel the oven for the next morning's bread. He glances up, sees you, smirks, and you know tomorrow will be worse. You remember an old story, a bit of village lore, about the thatcher who flirted with the Reeve's daughter and ended up having to build every roof for free for a season as penance. Not a formal sentence, just social obligation, deeply rooted in humiliation. His hands bled, and no one thanked him. Your wife finally speaks again. The chickens are in the coop. The goat's gone missing. Again. You nod. You're not sure if she wants you to find the goat, or if the goat is just a metaphor. Possibly both. You step back outside before dinner, needing air. The sky is dimming, smeared with lavender and soot. The road is quiet, but you feel it still. The tension in the air, like a fiddle string drawn tight. There's a boy on the fence, whittling a stick. He doesn't greet you, doesn't smile, just watches. Maybe, if you're lucky, the miller will be caught in something next week. Maybe the gossip will shift. Maybe the next festival will involve enough ale to blur everyone's memories. But tonight, your name is the punchline. Your life, the cautionary tale. And every creak of a shutter, every whispered word behind hands, reminds you. In a medieval village, you don't get to live things down. You live through them. You don't sleep much that night. The mattress is stuffed with straw that pokes through the fabric like judgmental little needles. Every time you shift, it rustles loud enough to wake the ghosts of disappointed ancestors. Your wife doesn't say anything, but you can hear her breathing. Deliberate, steady, turned away from you. She's not asleep either. Neither of you says a word. At first light, there's a knock at the door. Not the kind of knock you ignore. Rhythmic, measured, important. You know exactly who it is. You pull on your tunic and step outside. It's the steward. Again. His robes are less formal this time, but he's still wearing that little fur-trimmed cap that makes him look like a duck with legal authority. Court summons, he says, with the enthusiasm of a man reading out loud from a moldy turnip. You nod. He hands you the scroll, but you don't need to open it. You already know where you're going, to the church court. Now, here's your mainstream fact. Adultery in the medieval period wasn't typically handled by secular courts. No, this was the jurisdiction of the church, which meant your sins were now the business of men in robes who spoke Latin and had a lot of opinions about the book of Leviticus. The ecclesiastical court didn't dole out beatings or prison time. Instead, it specialized in moral punishment, confession, penance, public shame, and endless sermons about the wages of sin. You walk toward the parish hall, passing villagers who are suddenly very interested in the weeds they're pulling. One even starts sweeping dirt, which feels more symbolic than practical. A few kids follow you from a distance, giggling. You briefly consider turning around and making a break for the woods, but let's face it, you'd last about 4 hours before being eaten by something with tusks. The church is cold inside. Always is. Even in summer. It's the kind of chill that seeps into your ears and makes you think regretful thoughts. A candelabra flickers near the altar. The steward is already seated beside a balding priest with heavy eyebrows and the unmistakable air of someone who collects sins like stamps. He gestures for you to sit on a stool. Not a chair. A stool. It's wobbly. The priest clears his throat with a noise that suggests he's been saving it all night. You've been accused, he begins, of lechery and breach of conjugal duty. Lechery. That word always sounds like it should come with velvet and scandalous music. But here, in this dim church, with its drafty windows and slight mildew scent, it just feels like a cold slap. You're supposed to confess. That's the expected route. Confession, contrition, public penance. It's the ecclesiastical hat trick. But you hesitate. You weren't actually caught in the act. Just whispered about. Maybe followed. Maybe someone peeked through a fence and saw you talking too long to someone you probably shouldn't have. But talking isn't touching, right? Historians still argue whether medieval church courts required solid evidence for adultery or simply ran on the fumes of rumor and righteous suspicion. Some records show confessions extracted through social pressure alone. Others suggest surprising leniency, at least for men who showed proper remorse and promised never to do it again. Spoiler. Many of them did it again. The priest leans in. Is it true? He asks, voice low and theatrical. You swallow. Your mouth's dry. The answer doesn't matter as much as the tone of your answer. Repentant? You get 3 weeks of public kneeling and some linen robes. Defiant? You risk full-blown excommunication, or worse, a letter to the bishop. You mutter a vague, mostly true admission. Something about temptation, a moment of weakness, deep sorrow. You keep it short. Let them fill in the gaps. The priest nods slowly, as if he's communing with a higher authority through his eyebrows. Then we shall begin the process of reconciliation, he says. You will come to the chapel each morning for prayers. You will fast on bread and water 3 times a week, and you will wear the penitent's shift next Sunday. Ah, yes, the shift. A scratchy linen garment dyed gray, cinched at the waist with rope, worn with no shoes, and often accessorized with a wooden sign around your neck. You'll be required to stand in front of the entire congregation during Mass, listening to your sin described out loud by the priest like the world's most passive-aggressive performance review. Here's the quirky tidbit. In some regions, you had to hold a candle while wearing the shift. Not a lovely devotional candle. No, a fat, half-melted thing that dripped hot wax onto your hands during the entire sermon. One wrong shift in posture, and you'd be branded both spiritually and physically. The priest hands you a parchment detailing your penance. It's written in a Latin you don't fully understand, but the drawings along the border, tiny weeping angels, and one disturbingly gleeful demon, get the message across. As you leave, you pass a young couple waiting outside. She's red-faced. He's looking anywhere but at you. Looks like they're next. The cycle never stops. Back in the square, the same chicken from yesterday struts past like it owns the place. You envy its ignorance. No court for the chicken. No shift. No shame. You return home, carrying your scroll and your regret. Your wife eyes you, then the parchment, then the space between you both, like it's something she'll need to sweep out later. You hang the scroll by the door, a reminder, or a warning. Tomorrow begins your penance. For now, you sit, you eat your dry bread, and you wonder, was the moment worth the fallout? Somewhere behind the clouds, a bell rings for vespers. You think about candles and linen, and how long it takes to earn back silence. Morning light filters through the shutters, and you already hate it. It's the kind of pale, wet light that makes everything look older and colder, like the world's been dunked in sour milk. You rise slowly, muscles sore from too little sleep and too much tension. Today is your first day of penance in the chapel. You pull on your regular tunic for now, though you know the shift is waiting. You'll change into it at the church, just before Mass, where you'll join a small and growing collection of sinners arranged like decorative shame posts along the transept wall. Your feet hit the dirt path again. The morning air is sharp, and the dew clings to your skin like guilt. You pass the cooper, who nods without looking you in the eye. That's progress, maybe. Or pity. Hard to tell this early. Inside the chapel, a monk points you to the side room where the penitents change. You've seen the shift before, but seeing it and wearing it are two different things. It's scratchy, loosely stitched, and dyed an awkward gray, just enough to mark you out from the rest. There's no belt, no trim, just rope and shame. You change slowly, folding your clothes as if they might preserve your dignity for later. The shift hangs loose on your frame, exposing your collarbones and reminding you how little protection reputation ever offered. You step out into the cold nave barefoot. Every stone feels like it's judging you through your toes. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the medieval world, public penance wasn't optional. It was part of a broader system of ecclesiastical discipline known as correction, meant to guide wayward souls back into the embrace of the church. These rituals were often rigid, symbolic, and excruciatingly visible. The point wasn't just to atone. It was to perform your atonement in front of everyone you'd ever borrowed an egg from. The chapel is already half full. You walk to your designated spot by the north wall. You don't look up, but you feel the glances. People shift in their pews, lean to whisper. The baker coughs once, loudly. The priest begins the Mass. You try to focus on the Latin, but your mind drifts. Because that's what minds do when guilt gets boring. You wonder if anyone else in the room has done what you did and just never got caught. Probably. Maybe even the priest. Though if you ever said that out loud, you'd be doing penance for your penance. The sermon is long, and your arms start to ache from holding the candle. That's right. You've got one of those. A fat, knobbly thing that drips at unpredictable intervals. The wax lands hot on your knuckles and makes you flinch every time. You try not to move, but a thin stream of wax suddenly runs down the side, and you hiss through your teeth. The woman beside you shifts away slightly, as though sin might be contagious by proximity. Quirky tidbit for today. In some villages, they'd ring a small bell beside the penitent during the sermon to mark their status. Just a little ding every now and then, like a moral metronome. Fortunately for you, your village hasn't adopted that trend yet, but give it time. The priest, bless his enthusiasm, really leans into his script today. He speaks of fire, temptation, and the cleaving of flesh in defiance of holy union. You're fairly sure he made that phrase up last night and practiced it in the mirror. A few parishioners make the sign of the cross. Someone mutters, "Shame," loud enough for you to hear. Then comes the highlight, the reading of the transgressions. This is where the priest reads out the crimes, generically, of course, but just detailed enough that everyone can figure out who did what. When he describes a man who lay with another man's wife behind the grain barn on the feast of St. Columba, there is no mystery. Historians still argue whether this public naming was truly meant to purify the community or simply keep everyone entertained enough to keep attending services. After all, nothing draws a crowd like a scandal. Some scholars suggest that over time, these readings became less about spiritual guidance and more about social theater. You hear your sin described in the priest's clear voice, see heads tilt in your direction, and feel something shift deep in your stomach. Not guilt exactly, more like the heavy, itchy awareness of being narrated. You're not just a sinner. You're part of the sermon. After the Mass, you're not dismissed immediately. The other penitents shuffle toward the front for a short prayer. You remain where you are, as instructed. Today is your turn to kneel. No cushion, just stone. The minutes stretch. Your knees complain. The stone is unkind. You start to drift again, back to the moment everything changed. A look, a word, a decision made too easily. You wonder if your partner in sin is also somewhere in the crowd, hiding behind a veil and a saintly expression. Eventually, the monk gestures, and you rise, legs shaky. The candle is taken from you. Your hands are spotted with red welts, and your knees are already bruising. The shift clings in the wrong places. You leave the chapel as slowly as you entered. Outside, a few townsfolk wait, ostensibly for prayer or confession, but really just for the show's second act. You hear one of them say, "At least he's doing the penance properly." Another adds, "Still, it's not the first time someone's been in that shift." You make your way home, passing the well. You stop, splash your face. The water is colder today. It wakes you in a way the sermon didn't. At home, your wife has laid out bread and onions. You sit, eat in silence. She doesn't ask how it went. She doesn't need to. The shift gets hung on a hook near the door. You'll wear it again next Sunday, and probably the Sunday after that. And so begins the cycle. By the third day of your penance, you begin to notice things. Not spiritual enlightenment, no. That hasn't arrived yet. But you do start to recognize which cobblestones wobble, which ones catch your toes, and exactly how long it takes for the chapel bell to ring after the rooster crows. These become your rhythms now. Shame, it turns out, is as much a routine as it is a punishment. But this morning is different. There's an energy in the square, a buzz, the kind that usually comes before a sheep escapes or someone's found a mole in their flour sack. Today, though, it's about punishment, and not the soft candle wax and Latin variety. No, this is public. This is spectacle. You arrive to find the pillory already occupied, someone else's turn. But next to it, the village stocks have been hauled out and oiled. They glisten like a warning. And hanging from the blacksmith's window is a basket of slightly overripe vegetables. suspiciously available for anyone with good aim and bad manners. You remember the rules? Public punishment isn't just a consequence, it's an event. People bring bread, sometimes ale. Children are warned to be quiet, but never actually removed from the scene. It's like theater, but everyone knows the actors personally. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The stocks and pillory were standard tools of public humiliation in medieval communities. They weren't meant to cause serious injury, in theory, but they were designed to restrain and expose. Your ankles or wrists locked in place, your face open to the breeze, and to whatever projectiles someone's grandmother deemed too spoiled for supper. The pain wasn't in the joints, it was in the watching. Today's unfortunate soul is a cooper who, rumor has it, flirted rather enthusiastically with a visiting peddler's wife. Whether anything happened beyond words remains unclear, but that hardly matters. Once the whisper train starts, it doesn't break for evidence. He's already locked in, hands protruding awkwardly, chin tilted up like a man trying to look noble while sitting on a chamber pot. A group of older women gather nearby, arms crossed, faces like overcooked cabbage. One of them picks up a tomato with the precision of someone who's done this before. You're not throwing anything. You couldn't if you tried. Your role today is that of observer and possible future participant. After all, your penance isn't over. You haven't been sentenced to the stocks yet, but the court has a flair for variety. They might decide a second act of punishment is just what your soul needs. A boy runs past, slapping a handful of mud onto the cooper's sleeve. He's scolded, but not too harshly. After all, justice must be seen to be done. That's the unspoken rule. The community needs this, needs the reminder that wrongs are noticed, judged, and performed back to the community like a badly dressed morality play. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some towns, villagers were fined for not throwing something during a public shaming. Participation was mandatory. It wasn't just punishment. It was a social glue, binding the village together in shared outrage, with vegetables and casual cruelty as bonding agents. The cooper doesn't cry out. He grits his teeth and glares at the sky, as if hoping God might toss down a sympathetic rain cloud. No such luck. The sky remains stubbornly blue. Birds perch nearby, watching with a kind of mild interest, as if comparing notes on human stupidity. Historians still argue whether these punishments served true justice or simply reinforced social conformity through fear. Some believe they acted as pressure valves, letting villagers channel frustrations into public acts of moral correction. Others point to records of repeated offenses and suggest that humiliation wasn't much of a deterrent after all, just an excuse to feel morally superior while chucking a soft turnip at someone's ear. The priest arrives halfway through the spectacle, holding a small psalter and wearing an expression that mixes boredom with theatrical disapproval. He mumbles a few verses. The words waft over the crowd like stale incense. You watch the cooper. You watch the crowd. You watch yourself watching. And suddenly, you understand how quickly the line between audience and actor can blur. And then, because nothing is ever simple, a new figure appears at the edge of the square. It's the woman from the rumor, the peddler's wife. Her cloak is drawn tight, her chin high. She walks slowly, purposefully, and then stops, just within view. She doesn't speak. She doesn't flinch. She just looks. At the cooper, at the stocks, at the basket of spoiled cabbage. And in that stillness, something shifts. Just a little. The crowd quiets. The priest pretends to adjust his sleeve. A child sneezes. She turns and walks away, cloak swishing like a punctuation mark. You feel something in your stomach. Shame, pity, Maybe just indigestion from too many onions. But something. The punishment ends. The steward unlocks the stocks. The cooper stumbles out, rubs his wrists, and avoids every pair of eyes. He walks away slowly, like a man whose boots are filled with wet sand. You glance at the pillory. Empty again. Waiting. You know you'll be back in the chapel tomorrow, shift and candle in hand. But maybe, just maybe, you'll avoid this particular stage, or maybe not. In this village, redemption is rarely clean, and punishment, like gossip, is always looking for its next volunteer. You think you're getting used to the shift, that scratchy linen garment that leaves your arms goose-pimpled and your dignity gently eroded. But today, you're not alone in it, and that somehow makes it worse. There are 3 of you now. 3 penitents lined up like mismatched laundry, all in various shades of gray and repentance. One is a young girl, no older than 15, eyes downcast, hands folded so tightly her knuckles look like candle wax. The other is a man who's definitely worn this shift before. He even adjusted the rope belt like a seasoned tailor. But what really grabs your attention is what's different today. Accessories. The steward arrives with a small basket filled with, brace yourself, badges. Tiny embroidered patches sewn onto linen strips, each symbolizing the sin committed. A red heart, a broken ring, a weeping eye. Apparently, the church has gone full visual metaphor this week. He hands you a patch with 2 hands clasped and then ripped apart. Subtle. Real subtle. You pin it to your chest. Or rather, the monk does, since penitents aren't trusted with sharp objects. The fabric tugs awkwardly as he pierces it, and for a moment, you imagine the needle is a quill, writing your story for all to read. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In some late medieval parishes, penitents were marked with visible symbols of their crime. Embroidered emblems, colored ropes, or distinctive patterns on their garments. It was moral theater at its most literal. You didn't just wear your shame, you modeled it. The priest enters with his usual cloud of piety and mildew. His sermon today leans heavily on imagery. Flames licking at the feet of the lustful, angels weeping over broken vows, and one unfortunate metaphor involving butter churns that really didn't land. And there you stand, your little badge absorbing candlelight and judgment, while the congregation pretends not to look directly at you, except for the widow in the 3rd pew. She's staring. Hard. Now here comes the quirky detail. In some towns, these penitential shifts were color-coded. Gray for adultery, yellow for theft, white for slander. There's even record of a village where the shifts had bells sewn into the hem, so the penitent would tinkle wherever they walked. Sin with sound effects. Your village, blessedly, has not adopted that trend. Yet. The mass ends, and the steward pulls you aside. Special duty, he says, like he's offering you a promotion. You and the other penitents are to walk a procession through the village square, still in shift, still barefoot, with your little emblems proudly displayed. It's part penance, part parade, and part medieval PR campaign. The idea, apparently, is that your humility will inspire others to confess, reflect, or at least gossip more accurately. You're handed a staff to carry. It's not ceremonial. It's more for balance, because the streets are wet, and your pride is slicker than the cobblestones. The 3 of you begin the slow walk. One of the monks chants softly. The steward follows behind, making sure no one tries to duck into a side alley. You walk past the tavern, past the well, past the tannery, where a pig's skin is being stretched into something vaguely shoe-like. The smells cling. Your feet sting. Your little embroidered shame badge flaps gently in the breeze, like it's proud of itself. Children pause their games to watch. Adults glance up from their work, pretend they're not watching. A few make the sign of the cross. One offers a nod so slight it could have been a sneeze. No one throws anything. Not today. Today is more solemn than savage. A quiet kind of theater. Historians still debate the psychological effects of these penance parades. Some argue they offered true redemption through humility and visibility. Others think they reinforced rigid social control, moral pageantry that kept everyone in line, especially the lower classes who couldn't afford to make mistakes quietly. You reach the chapel again, make one final circle, and are dismissed. Back in your home, your wife doesn't say anything about the badge, but you notice she doesn't sit next to you at the table. There's a new space now, a small invisible gap that's somehow louder than words. You hang the shift on its usual hook. The badge stays on. You consider removing it, but something stops you. Maybe habit. Maybe guilt. Maybe you just don't want to deal with the monk and his needle again. As you lie down that night, you think about the girl in the shift beside you. Her emblem was a red circle with a flame inside it. You're not sure what it meant, but you're sure it wasn't good. The wind howls softly outside. Somewhere, a cart creaks. And in your dreams, you walk the village again. This time alone. Your badge glowing like a lantern, lighting the way toward forgiveness that never seems to arrive. You've never liked the village pond. Even on warm days, it smells like regret and frog droppings. But today, the air has a different tension. Thick, brackish, and unmistakably anticipatory. People are gathering early. The baker's daughter is braiding her hair on a stump. Two old men have set up stools with an unobstructed view. And there, at the edge of the water, sits the ducking stool. You've heard about it. You've seen it hauled out once or twice, usually for market day performances or when someone insulted the Reeves' wife. But this morning, it's your wife they're leading toward it. Your legs move before your mind can catch up. You cross the square, tunic half-tied, shift forgotten, and arrive just in time to see the steward reading a brief proclamation. The crowd listens with a reverence usually reserved for miracle plays or unusually large turnips. She stands silent, hands bound loosely at the wrists, cloak removed. She looks neither angry nor afraid, just cold. Her hair is braided neatly, the way she always does it when she wants control over something, anything. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Ducking stools were most commonly used for accusations of scolding, a medieval term that encompassed nagging, gossiping, or generally being a nuisance to men in power. But in some regions, particularly in rural villages, they were used as symbolic cleansing rituals for women accused of moral failings, including adultery. Your heart races. You know she didn't confess. She didn't have to. The church prefers voluntary penance, but the village court? Not so patient. Gossip, like kindling, ignites fast, and someone, somewhere, must have stoked the fire. The stool is an unholy contraption, a wooden chair fastened to a long beam, balanced over the pond like a seesaw of indignity. The idea is simple. Strap the accused in, dunk her repeatedly, and let the water purify whatever sin is said to linger. The crowd calls it justice. You call it cruelty with a splash. A boy offers her a daisy. She ignores it. The Reeve raises his hand. Begin. Two men, likely volunteers enjoying their civic duty a bit too much, begin to lower the chair. The beam creaks. She's still dry. Barely. Then, splash. The water is brown and full of reeds. It swallows her in one sudden gulp. The crowd leans in. A few gasp. You can't breathe. 10 seconds. Maybe 12. Then she's up again, gasping, hair plastered to her skull like seaweed. She spits. Doesn't scream. Her eyes dart, not for you, but for the sky. Here's a fringe detail. In some towns, ducking wasn't just a punishment. It was also diagnostic. If the woman floated, she was guilty. If she sank, well, oops. Either way, there was a strong chance of pneumonia. Historians still argue whether ducking was primarily theatrical or punitive. Some believe it was a deterrent, a ritual of shame designed to reinforce gender norms. Others argue it was rooted in folklore and symbolic purification. Whatever the origin, the outcome was the same: wet, humiliated, and shivering on a muddy bank. She's dunked again, and again. You step forward, but someone grips your arm. The steward. You're under penance, he reminds you. Not absolved. Best stay quiet. You want to punch him, or at least yell. But you don't. You stand there like a fence post, watching the woman you shared a bed with cough up pond water while a dog barks enthusiastically from somewhere near the tannery. The final dunk is mercifully brief. They haul her up, dripping and red-eyed, and unstrap her wrists. She doesn't fall. She walks. Past the crowd. Past the boy with the daisy. Past you. You follow her at a distance, not sure what to say. The only words in your head are "I'm sorry," and they feel too small for what's just happened. At home, she pulls a blanket over her shoulders and sits by the hearth, barefoot and silent. You fetch warm water without being asked. She doesn't thank you. That feels fair. You sit across from her. Watch the firelight catch in the droplets, still clinging to her lashes. She finally speaks. "They think I knew," she says quietly. "They think I agreed, or invited." You nod, unsure what else to do. "I didn't," she adds. Then after a pause, "But I didn't stop you either." The silence that follows isn't angry. It's just old, like stone. That night, you lie side by side, not touching, not speaking, just listening to the fire crackle and the wind rattle the shutters like it's trying to get in and judge you too. The ducking stool remains outside the pond, still dripping, waiting. There's a man in the square who always knows everything. He doesn't farm, doesn't cobble, and you're not entirely sure how he feeds himself. But somehow, he's always near the action, and always just a bit too interested. His name is Willem, and he's about to ruin your day. You wake to find a fresh knock on your door. Not the church this time, not the steward, just Willem, hands tucked into the sleeves of his coat like he's delivering bread instead of malice. He grins. "Thought you might like to know. It was Marna that turned her in." You blink. "Marna?" He nods. "Said your wife winked at the Reeves' cousin. At least that's what she says she saw. Might have been a squint. Hard to say." Then with a smirk that drips more than it smiles. Folk don't like when someone pretends to forget they're being watched. You close the door without a word, but the damage is done. Marna, the Reeves' cousin's neighbor, and apparently your wife's new nemesis. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many medieval communities, accusations of adultery or even impropriety were often rooted in neighborly disputes, long-standing grudges, or sheer boredom. Reporting sin wasn't just a civic duty, it was a kind of moral currency. It gave the accuser power, relevance, a brief moment in the moral spotlight. You step into the morning sun and walk the path to the chapel, head down, eyes on your feet. You know what's coming. Today's penance won't just be physical, it'll be social. As you cross the square, Marna is already sweeping her stoop. Aggressively. Her broom flings dust into the street like she's trying to erase footprints. She catches your eye and smiles sweetly, then snorts, as if the smell of sin wafted past. You don't stop. You can't. Inside the chapel, your shift hangs on a hook, freshly cleaned. The badge is still there, though someone's added a tiny stitch of red thread to it. You don't ask what it means. You're not sure you want to know. The monk helping you dress speaks softly. Another reported today, he says. A miller's wife. No evidence. But the crowd's hungry again. That's what it really is, isn't it? A kind of hunger. Not for justice, but for drama, for superiority, for stories. Here's a quirky little detail. Some villages actually paid informants for reporting moral transgressions. Not much. A few coins, maybe a length of cloth, but enough to make it worth keeping your eyes open and your ears twitching. It turned entire communities into self-monitoring morality machines. You step out into the nave, barefoot and cold again, shift brushing your knees, candle heavy in your hand. The congregation is larger today. The crowd has caught the scent of scandal, and the chapel is their theater. The priest climbs the pulpit, and the sermon begins. This one's got extra venom, possibly because he knows the reeve is in attendance. He speaks of lust, betrayal, and the rotting of the spiritual gut. You're fairly sure that phrase wasn't in the Bible, but it certainly gets a few approving nods. Marna is here too, sitting smugly near the front. She glances back at you once, just once, and it's not to admire your humility. Historians still argue about the role of women in medieval social surveillance. Some say women were victims of the system, powerless, voiceless, judged harshly. Others point out how some wielded gossip and accusation as a form of soft power, elevating their own virtue by pointing out others' supposed vice. Marna, you suspect, fits firmly in the latter camp. After the service, the steward steps forward. Names have been brought forth, he intones, and it falls to the court to investigate. Your stomach twists. You know what this means? Interrogations, witnesses, the whole slow grinding process of medieval justice, which runs on rumor but requires a stage. You hear snatches of conversation as the congregation leaves. Heard she smiled at him. And right in front of the candle rack, they think it started after the harvest. There's no proof, just whispers and glances. But that's all it ever takes. Back at home, your wife is by the fire, darning a sock. Her hair is still damp from yesterday's ducking, braided tighter than ever. You sit across from her, unsure whether to speak. They're saying I winked, she says flatly. You nod. I've got one bad eye, she continues. Been twitching since the coughing fever 2 winters ago. You look at her, really look, and there it is, a subtle pull at the edge of her eyelid, a little twitch, easily mistaken for a signal. She smiles bitterly. Well, now it's evidence. You both laugh. A tired, bent kind of laugh that has more resignation than mirth. And somehow, that helps. That night, you light a candle at the window. Not for the saints, not for guidance, just for the flicker, the quiet. Because in a village where everyone watches everyone, sometimes you just want to see something that doesn't stare back. Night brings little rest. You sleep lightly, ears straining for sounds that never come. Footsteps, knocks, the scrape of judgment on the doorstep. But morning arrives with only silence and birdsong, almost suspiciously peaceful. You rise early, not out of piety, but from sheer habit. Shame wakes before the rooster. Outside, the sky is pearl gray and yawning. A breeze carries the smell of damp hay and something faintly metallic. Someone's sharpening shears too early again. But as you step into the square, something's off. There's music, not the lute and pipe kind. This is cruder. Percussion, clanging, a metallic din of pans, kettles, and anything else loud enough to rattle the teeth of decency. You follow the noise and find the procession already in motion. A charivari. It moves slowly, like a badly organized parade. A donkey at the front, ears twitching in time to the rhythm. A man rides it backward, clutching its mane with white knuckles and eyes wide with something between regret and nausea. On his back, someone has strapped a crude sign reading, "He let his wife stray." Here's your mainstream historical fact. Charivari was a popular form of folk justice across medieval Europe, often enacted when the community felt someone had failed their moral duty, especially in cases of adultery, remarriage too soon after a spouse's death, or simply being an ineffective husband or wife. It was loud, public, and meant to mock. Think of it as social media, with more livestock. You watch as the crowd grows. Children bang spoons on pots. A man with a bell tied to his ankle hops in time, kicking up dust. A woman carries a string of dried fish heads and waves them like banners. Everyone's smiling, but not kindly. The man on the donkey doesn't resist. He slumps forward, red-faced and silent, as if he knows any protest will only make the show more exciting. You recognize him. His name is Elaine, a shepherd. Quiet, dependable, the kind of man who always helped repair fences in spring and never asked for repayment. But his wife? Gone. Ran off with a traveling cooper last week, or so the tale goes. And so, he gets punished. Here comes your quirky tidbit. In some villages, when a woman committed adultery and left her husband, he was paraded, not her. Because clearly, the thinking went, he must have failed in his husbandly duties. Failed to satisfy, to control, to prevent. Logic was optional. Mockery was mandatory. You follow the procession from a distance, not part of it, not yet, but close enough to smell the donkey and hear every off-key clang of the pots. Historians still debate whether Charivari was a true form of justice or simply a communal coping mechanism. Some suggest it served to reinforce social norms by parodying transgression. Others argue it was just a way to laugh at someone else's misfortune without having to look at your own reflection too long. The donkey pauses to relieve itself. The crowd cheers. Elaine doesn't flinch. They pass the tavern, the smithy, the chapel gates, each landmark a checkpoint in public shaming. At one corner, a girl tosses rose petals. Irony? Maybe. Or just something to throw. The steward walks nearby, watching, but not stopping it. Because that's the trick. This isn't official punishment. It's folk ritual. The church frowns on it, but turns a blind eye. So long as no one dies, and the goat gets returned. Eventually, they circle back to the square. Elaine is helped down, offered a cup of cider, and then left alone on a bench like nothing happened. The crowd disperses in twos and threes, satisfied, chattering like people who've just attended a very strange feast. You approach him cautiously. He doesn't look up, just stares at his feet. "Sorry," you say. "It's not much, but it's what you've got." He shrugs. "Better than being in the pillory," he mutters. You sit beside him. Two men marked, in different ways. His shame is loud, yours quieter, but equally sticky. "I didn't even know she'd left until someone said I'd be riding a donkey," he adds. "Thought she was just visiting her sister." You both chuckle. It's hollow, but it's human. Later, you return home to find your wife trimming herbs in the doorway. She's seen the procession. Of course she has. "That could have been you," she says, not unkindly. You nod. "Might still be." She doesn't laugh, but her mouth twitches. You help her tie the bundle of thyme. The scent fills the air, sharp, green, forgiving in a way that people rarely are. That night, you lie awake again, but the clanging in your ears isn't from guilt. It's from the memory of spoons on pots, of fish heads fluttering like prayer flags, and a donkey that just wanted to walk in peace. It's feast day, and the village is dressed in its finest. Faded banners pulled from trunks, tablecloths embroidered long ago by hands now buried beneath yew trees, and pies that look suspiciously like yesterday's stew with crusts on top. But today isn't about food or saints. It's about a name whispered with too much curiosity and not quite enough reverence. Sir Edward of Briarhall. The nobleman himself arrives by horse, his cloak fluttering dramatically, as though he hired the wind in advance. He's flanked by 2 squires and followed by a cart that suspiciously jingles like coins swaddled in linen. The villagers bow, or pretend to. Even the steward's posture straightens like a fence post suddenly inspected. You know why he's here? Everyone does. The rumors began weeks ago. A lady's maid overheard something. A stable boy saw a boot where no boot should have been. And now, the great Sir Edward, whose marriage was considered a political success but a romantic disaster, has arrived to settle things. Mainstream historical fact: nobles accused of adultery, either committing it or tolerating it in their household, rarely faced public punishments like pillories or duckings. Instead, they were invited to leave town, donate heavily to the church, or embark on suspiciously well-timed pilgrimages. Justice for the elite had better shoes. The steward meets Sir Edward at the edge of the square, looking deeply uncomfortable. The priest arrives seconds later, clearly having dressed in haste. His robe is inside out at the hem, and he's forgotten his reading spectacles. There is no trial. There is no accusation. Just a hushed conversation behind the altar, after which the steward emerges and makes a vague announcement about restoring harmony to the region and resolving internal matters with grace. You watch from the sidelines, shiftless today, but not invisible. Your wife stands beside you. She whispers, "He paid them off, didn't he?" You nod. "Wish I could pay someone to stop talking about me." You chuckle, then freeze, because here comes the squire, a little too direct in his gait for comfort. He stops in front of you, bows a fraction, and hands over a folded scrap of parchment. A note. To the man in the linen shift, who knows the feeling of being seen. Meet me behind the chapel. You turn it over. No name. No seal. Just that. It's risky. Possibly foolish. But you're already known. Already marked. Curiosity wins. Behind the chapel, Sir Edward leans against the wall, a piece of straw between his teeth, like he's auditioning for peasanthood. You almost laugh. "I watched you during the Charivari," he says without greeting. "You didn't cheer." "I wasn't in the mood." He nods. "Neither was Elaine. He said you sat with him." You shrug. "It was the least I could do." He straightens, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. "They want me gone. My wife, well, she's not quiet about her preferences. And I," he hesitates, then adds, "wasn't discreet." You wait. It feels like there's more. "She's of noble blood. I am not." His smile is rueful. "I had land. She had titles. Now I have neither." You understand more than you'd like. In this village, power flows in whispered alliances and the ability to redirect shame. He had no more protection than you, just better embroidery. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. In several noble households, especially in France and England, private adultery disputes were settled by convening family councils, not courts. These included in-laws, confessional priests, and, when necessary, servants who could be bribed into silence or eloquence. Sometimes it ended in separation, sometimes in quietly arranged accidents. Historians still argue whether nobles' ability to escape public consequences undermined moral order or simply maintained the illusion of control. Did their leniency encourage licentiousness? Or was it just one more way the church and aristocracy played different games with the same rules? Sir Edward sighs. "I leave tonight. They'll say it's for business, or diplomacy, or maybe pilgrimage if they want to sound pious." You glance at his horse, which is being watered nearby by a boy who's clearly been tipped well. "Where will you go?" you ask. He grins. "Away. Far enough that no one has the energy to drag my name through mud anymore. Let them find someone else to watch. You nod, because they will. They always do. He leaves before sundown, with a full coin purse, a light saddlebag, and a story that's already being retold inaccurately. You hear one villager mutter that he left to join the Crusades. Another insists he's going to a monastery. By the next morning, someone will claim he was summoned by the king himself. That evening, your wife places a candle in the window. You do the same. Not for Sir Edouard, not for yourself, but because the darkness feels less heavy when there's light to confuse it. The village is quieter today, but it's not a peaceful kind of quiet. It's the stillness that follows a thunderclap. Everyone's waiting for the next noise, the next scandal, the next person to trip into the moral nettles and come out scratching. You feel it in your bones. Someone's going to talk, and then it happens. A man stands in the square, arms folded, voice steady but tight. His name is Ansel, and he's married to Maud, the midwife, a respected woman, stern, capable, owns a mortar that weighs more than some children. Ansel is not as respected, known mostly for being quiet and watching card games without ever playing. But today, Ansel accuses, "She slept with the Reeve," he says, loudly, clearly, with the cadence of a man who has rehearsed this confession for days. There's a collective inhale from the crowd. You hear it. One great wind of attention, sucked inward. Now here's the twist. He's not accusing Maud. He's accusing himself of adultery, of infidelity, of betrayal. And then he turns and says, "But she forgave me, and I wish I hadn't told her." The silence shifts from shocked to confused. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval accusations of adultery didn't always lead to punishment. Sometimes they led to reconciliation, but only if the injured party, typically the husband, was willing to forgive. The church encouraged it, even romanticized it. The idea of repentance followed by mercy played well from the pulpit. But what if the story turned the other way? What if confession wasn't a pathway to peace, but a stick shoved into the spokes? That's exactly what happens. Maud steps forward, her face a fortress. She says nothing, just stares at Ansel for a long time. And then, softly, almost too calmly, she says, "I never asked to be made an example." She walks away. Ansel stands there, alone, suddenly very small. A man who thought the truth might heal, now exposed under a different kind of judgment. The communal wince. Pity mixed with embarrassment. Not just for the affair, but for the performance. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, especially in parts of Italy and southern France, false or self-serving confessions could backfire legally. If a man confessed, but no one had accused, the court would consider his own testimony the official evidence, and could proceed to punish him without investigation. You watch Ansel slowly realize that. The steward steps forward, brows raised like two hawks ready to pounce. "You'll need to come with me," he says. "Voluntary penance is still penance." And just like that, Ansel joins the shift wearers. Another badge sewn, another candle distributed. Historians still argue about the sincerity of medieval confessions. Were they acts of penance, of guilt, or just clumsy attempts to control the narrative? When you live in a world where stories are currency, sometimes a public apology is just an investment in pity. That evening, the chapel is dimmer than usual. Candles burn lower. The hymns are softer. The sermon is about honesty, but the priest's voice cracks halfway through, possibly from disapproval, possibly from trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. You kneel beside Ansel, who now wears the shift awkwardly, like someone trying on clothes 2 sizes too small. "I thought it would make things better," he whispers. You don't answer. You've thought that too. Outside, Maud is seen heading toward the woods, mortar in hand. Someone jokes she's off to make a truth potion. No one laughs. Back at home, your wife says nothing about the confession, but she sets down 2 bowls instead of 1. Lentil stew. Hot, heavy, and tasting slightly of forgiveness. You both eat in silence. When she finishes, she looks at you and says, "Don't ever confess on my behalf." You nod. Because in this village, honesty isn't always cleansing. Sometimes, it's just a new way to bleed. It starts with a whisper. Doesn't it always? This one slips through the thatched rooftops, rustles down the lanes, and nestles in every ear with the same promise. She's expecting, and no one knows who the father is. You don't even have to ask who she is. It's Isabet, the Reeves' niece. Young, pretty in a milkmaid kind of way, fond of honey cakes and long walks that never seem to be quite so solitary as they should be. And now, clearly, she's taken a shortcut through the village's moral hedgerow. The signs arrive subtly. She stops helping in the herb garden, sits more, wears looser dresses. The baker's wife, who knows a thing or two about secrets, starts glancing at her belly like it's a sundial. And then someone does the math. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval villages, pregnancy was often the starting gun for retrospective justice. A woman's rounded belly was considered evidence of not just adultery, but timing. Because if a baby arrived too soon after marriage, or worse, without marriage at all, everyone in town turned into a calendar. Let's see. She was at the Lammas feast, and she danced rather close to that visiting wool merchant. The villagers do the math out loud, in huddles, over bread, while shelling peas. You even hear it from the blacksmith, who somehow turns a rhythm of hammer strikes into a rough gestational chart. Shouldn't be this big if she married in June, someone mutters. Wasn't showing at Michaelmas, but by all saints, she waddled. There's a certain cruel satisfaction in it, a kind of social Sudoku. But it's dangerous too, because once the math is done, the punishment clock starts ticking. Isabet stays quiet. So does the Reeve. That alone is suspicious. He's a loud man by nature, yells at pigs, shouts across fields, but on this subject, he is remarkably monk-like, and that only feeds the speculation. Whispers swirl like chimney smoke. Maybe the child's his. Or maybe she was promised to someone else. Or maybe she chose not to marry the father at all. You pass her one day on the road. She looks tired, but not ashamed. There's a subtle defiance in her spine. Her hands rest lightly on her stomach, not hiding it. That's not usual. Quirky detail of the day. In some medieval communities, women accused of bearing illegitimate children were forced to perform public penance with the newborn in their arms. Picture that. Barefoot, shift-clad, child swaddled in linen, standing before the altar while the priest lectures about lust, duty, and the dangers of moonlit haystacks. Some places even had what was grimly nicknamed the sinner's cradle, a wooden contraption shaped like a coffin that the mother was made to sit in with her child, symbolizing her moral death and potential rebirth through penance. Yes, subtlety was not a medieval strength. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were about genuine spiritual cleansing or community-controlled humiliation rituals designed to reinforce patriarchal power. The baby wasn't the one being judged, but they were certainly held up as Exhibit A. Back in the village, you hear a new rumor. Isabet won't name the father. Not to the priest, not to her family, not even to her closest friend, who reportedly offered bribes in the form of apple tarts and soft wool. She said it's no one's, someone scoffs, as if children grow from gooseberries now. You admire it, a little. That quiet resistance, the refusal to fuel the fire with more names. She's shamed, but she won't become the village's next theater show. But the court wants a name. They need one. Punishment can't proceed without a proper scapegoat. And so the steward begins to guess. They ask the wool merchant. He denies everything, swears on his ledger. They ask the priest's assistant, a pale young man with a tendency to blush at the word ointment. He nearly faints. They even glance sideways at the reeve, who thunders something about blasphemy and storms off to inspect the ditches. Still, no father. The church suggests a modified penance, a procession for Isabet alone, no baby yet in arms, but with an empty cradle balanced on her head. Symbolic, humbling, completely absurd, and she refuses, just like that. "I'll do penance once the child is born," she says. "If he kicks on the altar, at least you'll know he's listening." The priest is scandalized. The steward scribbles furiously. The reeve glares so hard his eyebrows nearly fall off. But she is unmoved. Later, at home, your wife surprises you. "She's braver than most men in this village," she says, while trimming the edge of a pie crust. "Carrying shame in a baby? That's more than some can manage." You nod, because she's right. That night, the candle you place at the window burns a little longer. And in the quiet, you picture a girl in a shift, not walking in shame, but striding through it, holding her head high, with an empty cradle on her crown, like a strange, sad tiara. It's a market morning when you hear the most unexpected thing in a village already brimming with scandal. Someone has accused an animal of adultery. You nearly drop the basket you're carrying. It's full of onions, which seems appropriate. This day already smells ridiculous. You follow the noise, because of course there's noise, and find a crowd gathering near the south pasture. In the center stands Hob the swineherd, looking deeply offended. At his side, a very unrepentant-looking goat. "I swear," Hob is saying, "that's my nettle. And she don't belong to no one else." Standing opposite is Jory, the tanner's boy, red-faced and pointing. "Then why's she been in my shed 3 nights running, huh? And she don't even eat my turnips. Just sits there, like she's waiting for company." The steward arrives, trying to maintain dignity in the face of goat-centered rage. He clears his throat. "Enough. Enough. This is not a matter for church or court." "But he's saying I've shared my goat," Hob shouts, "and I don't share nothing I feed." You watch, fascinated. The goat, named Nettle, simply chews a bit of cloth she found in the mud and bleats as if to say, "Men are exhausting." Now, here's your mainstream historical fact. In some regions of medieval Europe, animals were genuinely tried in ecclesiastical or secular courts. Pigs accused of killing children, cows accused of breaking Sabbath laws, even roosters blamed for crowing demonic Latin. These trials included legal representation, witnesses, and public sentencing. Yes, really. This, thankfully, is not one of those trials. But the villagers are clearly having fun with it. Someone suggests a goat duel. Another offers to officiate a wedding, just to make it proper. Even the priest, when summoned, looks vaguely amused. The steward, however, is less charmed. "There is no adultery law," he says, "that applies to livestock." "Then who do I sue?" Hob insists. "My goat's been reputationally compromised." Your wife, standing beside you with a basket of barley loaves, whispers, "Maybe she just prefers Jory's shed." You chuckle, despite yourself. Even the baby strapped to the miller's back seems to let out a timely gurgle, like a goat-sized laugh. Here's your quirky tidbit. A few ecclesiastical records contain references to animals being paraded in mock penance rituals. Most likely, symbolic, possibly just bizarre village theater. One goose was apparently dressed in linen and made to walk behind a man accused of impure acts. the implication being that the goose was a co-defendant. It's unclear if the goose confessed. Historians still argue whether these trials were satire, sincere, or somewhere in between. Were they rooted in folklore, divine punishment theory, or just an elaborate excuse to distract from famine and fleas? In this case, the steward finally ends the standoff by declaring that Nettle shall henceforth be the shared goat of both households, and that a fence will be built between the properties. But she may pass, he adds solemnly, if she chooses to do so. And that's how the goat became the village's first legally free agent. Later that day, back at your table, your wife shakes her head. If I were a goat, she muses, I'd stay on neither of their land. You nod. Nettle deserves better. She deserves her own field, and her own turnips. Maybe a stool with her name carved in it. Maybe a better name. You both laugh. It's the first real warm laugh in days. The world feels less heavy when animals are involved, especially ones too busy chewing things to care about gossip. And for a moment, as the fire crackles and your home smells of baking rye and goat-free drama, you almost forget the shift, the shame, and the chapel. Almost. Outside, the wind carries the sound of a bleat, and you wonder, if Nettle truly had sinned, would she still walk so proudly? There's a thin man on a horse at the edge of the village today. You almost miss him. He's cloaked in brown, hood drawn, legs dangling like broomsticks over a gelding that looks equally unimpressed to be here. But the villagers notice. They always notice. That's a friar, someone whispers. From Farwick, maybe, or Dunmere. Carrying a ledger, another adds. Not a Bible. You pretend not to watch, but your eyes betray you. The friar dismounts slowly, looks around with a gaze so calm it's somehow unsettling, and makes his way to the chapel without saying a word. The steward follows, clutching his hat like it's the only thing keeping his head from floating away. You've seen men like this before, roving moral inspectors, wanderers of righteousness. They arrive without warning, sniffing out corruption, laziness, and the general stench of spiritual backsliding. They say they're sent by the bishop, but no one ever sees the letter. Just the man. And the judgment. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the later Middle Ages, especially as ecclesiastical structures tightened their grip on rural regions, some parishes were subject to visitations, surprise audits of their religious and moral conduct. These were often conducted by friars, bishops' envoys, or appointed clerics tasked with reporting on everything from church repairs to the sins of the villagers. It was part spiritual census, part performance review. And so begins the questioning. Not from the pulpit. No, that would be too easy. The friar goes door to door. Quiet knocks. Calm voice. Always carrying that little leather-bound book. You see him speak to the alewife. She scowls at first, but eventually invites him in. He doesn't stay long. Then the cooper, the widow, the midwife. He speaks softly, nods often, writes quickly. And then, of course, he comes to you. He doesn't wait for an invitation, just walks into your courtyard like he's been here before in a dream. Your name? He asks. You tell him. Still under penance? You nod. Still married? Another nod. He glances up from his ledger. How's that going? You blink. She's still here. He gives the faintest smile. That's worth writing down. He doesn't press. Just asks if you've confessed, done your kneeling, borne your shame. You answer truthfully. The linen shift still hangs near the door. The badge with its stitched hands still dangles like a forgotten prayer flag. Quirky detail time. Some friars had a system of shorthand for sins and statuses. A cross for full confession. A triangle for suspected dishonesty. A wavy line for recalcitrant or cheeky. You wonder which you've just earned. He thanks you, asks to speak to your wife. You call her, unsure if she'll emerge. But she does. Face set, eyes unreadable. They talk by the door. You don't hear the words, but you see her arms cross, then unfold. She leans against the wall, nods once, says something that makes him pause. He writes, and then he's gone. By sundown, the village square is buzzing. The friar has issued his findings. Nothing posted publicly, but whispers flutter like moths in a candle shop. Father Brannock drinks too much wine. The baker hasn't confessed since Whitsun. The reeve might be asked to donate 2 pigs and an apology. But the biggest stir? The new penalty order, a public penance circuit. Once a fortnight, all under penance must walk, together, from one end of the village to the other, shift-clad and barefoot, reciting psalms as they go. You are, of course, on the list. So 2 mornings later, you line up. It's barely dawn. Mist curls through the trees, and the grass is so wet it might as well be a stream. The shift is colder now, thinner from too many washings. The badge sags, the thread pulling at the corners. There are 5 of you today. Ansel, still red-eared from his confession. Isabet, very pregnant and stubbornly silent. The cooper's apprentice, accused of intentional lustfulness after being found shirtless in the bakery. And a very confused man named Clovis, who keeps forgetting why he's here at all. You walk slowly, barefoot through puddles, murmuring psalms half remembered from childhood. Have mercy upon me, O Lord, someone chants. Deliver me from mine enemies. Another mutters, I walk through the valley, and then loses the rest. Villagers wake early just to watch. Some offer nods. A few pretend to look away. But you know their ears are open. And the friar? He walks behind, silent, his pen ready. Historians still debate whether these penance circuits were common or exaggerated by later records. Some say they were rare and symbolic. Others argue they were routine in regions where moral panic met liturgical creativity. You just know they hurt your feet. Back home, your wife meets you with a towel and warm water. She doesn't speak, just helps you wash the muck from your toes. Her fingers are gentle, steady. Did they find what they were looking for? You ask softly. She shrugs. They never do, but they do love writing it down. That night, the friar sleeps in the chapel loft. He's gone by dawn. His horse leaves neat hoofprints in the mud. His ledger, now fuller, rides beside him like a companion. And you? You're still here, still walking, still under watch. The final walk is the longest. It isn't that the path is longer, not really. The distance from the chapel to the southern edge of the village hasn't changed. But something about today makes your feet drag more, makes the shift feel heavier, makes the badge itch, like it's sewn with thistle instead of thread. This is your last public penance. It should feel like a relief. It doesn't. You stand in the chapel before dawn, candlelight pooling weakly on the stone floor. The air smells of beeswax and damp moss. The monk helping you into the shift seems almost apologetic. His fingers are gentler now. He doesn't tug the rope belt so tight this time. You know the path, he says. You do. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval penance was often a prescribed duration, measured not just in days, but in repeated acts. Some were assigned weekly walks. Others required months of processions, prayers, and public kneeling. And when it was done, the final ritual wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, like slipping out of a role that had become second skin. You step outside and join the others. Today, it's just you and Isabet. The others completed theirs or left early. Clovis wandered off mid-procession last week, and hasn't returned, though someone claims they saw him preaching to a sheep. Elizabeth looks tired, but calm. Her belly is round and high now. She doesn't wear a badge. She never did. Last one, you say? She nods. And then, wordlessly, you begin to walk. The village is half awake. Light spills from a few shutters. Chickens stir. Someone coughs. A dog barks once, and then thinks better of it. You pass the well, the pillory, the square where the Charivari danced and the goat nearly went to court. You pass the chapel where the friar tallied sins like ledger entries, the house where Marna sweeps judgment into the street, and the bakery where the apprentice now always wears both sleeves. The people you pass don't jeer. They don't applaud. They just watch. That, somehow, is worse. There's something about being seen without comment that leaves you more naked than the shift ever could. Quirky detail. In some places, a bell was rung after a penitent's final walk, not for shame, but for release. The idea was that, like a soul freed from purgatory, the sinner had completed their earthly trial. A new start, a clean slate. No one rings a bell for you, but you hear one anyway. Distant, imagined, soft. You and Elizabeth reach the edge of the village. She stops, hands on her belly. He kicks every time we pass the tanners, she says. Even he's got opinions, you reply. She smirks, probably wondering what kind of place he's being born into. You nod. She glances at your badge. You taken that off? You look down at it. The stitched hands, torn and rejoined, fraying at the corners. Maybe, you say. Eventually, she doesn't press. You turn back together. The procession now a return. Less of a march, more of a drift. Feet sore, head bowed, but not in shame. Not anymore. You part ways at the square. She goes left. You go right. At home, your wife meets you at the door with a basin. You wash your feet in silence. She dries them without speaking. Then, without a word, she lifts the badge from your chest, unpins it, and sets it on the table. You don't stop her. Later, she takes it out to the garden and buries it. No ceremony, just a patch of earth and a seedling planted over it. Maybe thyme, maybe sage, something that grows despite what's underneath. And so, your penance ends. No trumpets, no absolution, just the quiet, just the stillness, just the slow returning to life. The village settles into dusk once more, all its judgment folded away into hearth smoke and half-spoken prayers. You sit near the fire, shift replaced with warm wool, the silence no longer heavy, but soft, a kind of silence you've earned. Outside, the wind moves through the thatched roofs like a sigh. A candle flickers on the windowsill. Far off, a bell rings. Real or imagined, it doesn't matter. Its echo melts into the dark. You close your eyes, and the village fades, stone by stone, voice by voice, until it's just the sound of your own breath. No more footsteps behind you. No more cold stares. Just the hum of a world that has, for now, stopped judging. And as sleep draws near, your thoughts grow softer too. The path you walked, the names they called, the way the shift caught the morning light. All of it becomes a blur, a whisper, a lullaby made of mistakes and forgiveness. You're no longer walking, you're drifting, and there's nothing left to carry.